Oenology will take you in a long journey which starts here in Thailand. Surprised? Well, yes, indeed, you should, as normally the word wine classically refers to countries like France, Italy, Spain, Portugal or Germany. Or you could mention California, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Mexico and so on. Well, in fact, we definitely want to take you to Thailand. Why so? Indeed, our university is to be found at an hour and a half driving from Bangkok. But that's not the only reason. Thailand also produces wines, and not far from here either. Wine and beer are the most common alcoholic beverages. Where can we find them? The answer will refer to the climate. When one thinks of the favorite alcoholic drinks of people in Italy, Spain and France, one thinks of wine. The vine needs a certain type of climate to produce grapes. If it can't support quite cold winters, on the opposite, the production of quality grapes needs a lot of sun. That's the reason why in the northern part of the region where we can find vineyards, these are located on the northern slopes of river valleys or hills to get the southern exposure with a maximum of sun. This is what we can observe in Luxembourg on the bank of the Mosel River, or in Germany following the same river, for instance. Basically, the grapevine enjoys a Mediterranean climate, a maritime climate like in Bordeaux, or continental as in Burgundy. But nowadays, we can even find vineyards here in Thailand. One of them can be found a few kilometers away from our university. But we can find vineyards at many places, like in the Loi province or in Korat, which is Nakhon Ratchasima province, or not far from Bangkok, next to Hua Hin, or in the north, in Phichit and Chiang Rai. Normally, vines need a 4-month winter dormancy, which is the case in regions with 4 seasons. In the wet, humid tropics, grapevines are evergreen, grow continuously. Tropical temperatures disrupt the normal vine cycle of winter dormancy, but a form of dormancy and some leaf fall can be induced by water stress. New latitude wines is a newly coined term referring to wines made from grapes grown out of the traditional grape cultivating latitudes. Where the climate does not allow vines to grow, we find beer. Beer is not made from grapes, but from grain. Beer is mainly based on barley, which can be grown in harsher conditions than vines. The city of Pilsen in Bohemia has given its name to a kind of beer that has overwhelmed the world, the Pilsner. In countries like Belgium, Germany, the Czech Republic or the UK, people mainly drink beer. In 2012, global beer consumption amounted to 187 million kiloliters, which is equivalent to 296 billion 633 milliliter bottles. This course deals with wine, so we won't develop the total beer consumption. What's the path from fruit to wine or from grain to beer? All life on the earth depends on the sun, or almost. Why do I mention sun and its energy at this stage? Because we cannot mention alcoholic beverages like wine or beer without mentioning fermentation. In fact, all this is a matter of how to use energy. That energy comes from the sun, and a complex process, the photosynthesis, enables plants to use or store that energy. We also mention energy to remind everybody to one important fact. All energy comes from the sun. Some energy we are using took millions of years to be synthesized. We are burning very complex and very useful molecules in our vehicles. We must find a way to apply the sufficiency economy principle and select sustainable energy sources. A shorter way to use solar energy can be found in the production of ethanol from sugarcane, and more countries are following that path. The ideal world would be a world using electric cars where electricity would directly come from the sun. This is fortunately ongoing, otherwise mankind would run into the wall. But let's go back to fermentation. We cannot mention fermentation without talking about yeasts and carbohydrates. The name carbohydrate comes from the French hydrate de carbone. In the molecule of glucose or fructose, we can find one water molecule for each carbon atom. Hydrate comes from the ancient Greek hydor, which means water, like in hydraulic, for instance. Glucose is C6H12O6 or C6 and 6H2O, H2O being water. Glucose and fructose are monosaccharides. Sucrose or normal sugar is a disaccharide. Grain, potatoes on their side contains polysaccharides. Poly equals many, like in polygon meaning many angles. We have mentioned wine and beer. Wine is made from fruit juice, grape juice. Beer must follow a more sophisticated process because of the polymer form of the sugars. To understand that process, let's study the case of a disaccharide, sucrose, or normal table sugar. Here in Thailand, it's made from sugarcane. The fermentation process breaks down simple sugars only, monosaccharides. Sugarcane is not a fruit, but it has juice. People in the Philippines produce a wine from such a juice. They call it basi. Well, sucrose is made of two hexose, glucose and fructose. X, like in hexagon, means 6. A molecule of hexose has got 6 carbon atoms. Yeasts must first break down sucrose into glucose and fructose before being able to start the fermentation process itself. Therefore, they need to use one enzyme, invertase or sucrase, to achieve that task. In the case of grains, the sugar structure is more complex, and yeast cannot produce the needed enzymes. How can we make beer? Allowing the grain to sprout, called malting, creates enzymes that break down the starch into sugars and shorter chain sugar polymers, dextrin. To start growing, to germinate, the grain must find a way to be able to use the stored energy. The strategy is similar as for yeasts. Grains produce enzymes able to crack down polysaccharides into a disaccharide. In this case, the enzyme is called amylase and the disaccharide maltose. Have you ever heard the appellation single malt whiskey? The germination process releases enzymes and is then stopped by heating and drying the grains in order to keep as much sugar as possible inside the grains. The next step is the brewing process, which will extract the sugar by adding water and heating the mixture around 65–68 degrees Celsius for a certain period of time. In fact, there are 2 types of enzymes, alpha amylase and beta amylase, having a different action and working at different temperatures, 68 degrees Celsius for alpha amylase and 65 degrees Celsius for beta amylase. The final result will depend upon the way the mashing has been run, more in favor of alpha amylase with a higher alcohol content or beta amylase giving a more complex taste to the beer. Based on what has been said so far, we would say alcoholic beverages made from juice would be called wines and from grain beers. Well, it's not that simple. We live here in Asia where the main crop is rice. People here make a beverage from rice and they would rather call wine that beer. In Thailand it's called sato. Sake in Japan and China also has rice wines like Shaoqing rice wine. Rice contains polysaccharides, but the breakdown process doesn't happen in sequence like for a beer. Enzymes are produced by malts like Rhizopus oryzae or Aspergillus oryzae, which produce enzymes like maltase and dextrinase, able to break down starch, polysaccharides, into maltose or dextrose. The alcoholic fermentation process takes place at the same time. We've seen that grapes contain monosaccharide, sugar cane contains disaccharides, and grains contain polysaccharides. We know that only monosaccharide can be fermented and also that yeast do have a strategy how to deal with disaccharide. We are not at the end of our discovery, but at the beginning of an amazing journey into life-important processes. As I said earlier, the whole is a matter of energy. To produce an effort, our body needs energy. Our cells burn glucose to produce that energy. Doing so, our cells consume oxygen, and after a while, there isn't enough oxygen, but we still need energy. The whole process changes, and the pain we feel is due to the production of lactic acid. Yeasts are also living cells and follow more or less the same laws. At the end of the 18th century, French scientists tried to understand fermentation and the process of ethanol production. For famous chemists like Lavoisier, all is due to pure chemistry. Gay-Lussac, another French scientist, wrote an equation which is still valid. C6H12O6 gives 2CH3CH2OH plus 2CO2 plus heat. Nowadays, we can update this equation at the level of the energy produced and write C6H12O6 equals to 2CH3CH2OH plus 2CO2 plus energy, which is heat plus ATP. ATP will be explained a bit later. The French chemist Louis Pasteur was the first to demonstrate experimentally that fermented beverages result from the action of living yeast transforming glucose into ethanol. Pasteur discovered that the production of ethanol occurred in the absence of oxygen and called this life without air anaerobisis, from the Greek a without aero air and bios life. We have simple sugars, glucose and fructose. We have yeast, what else? Oxygen. Human beings cannot survive without oxygen. Let's have a look at the cellular respiration called glucolysis, the universal process. Glucolysis again comes from ancient Greek, glucose or sweet and lysis or break down. Glucose is broken down by enzymes into pyruvate molecules. Where's the energy mentioned above? That's a question you may ask. Do you remember the ATP mentioned a bit earlier? ATP is like a biological energy unit. It stands for Adenosine Tri-phosphate. When the cell needs energy, it removes phosphate from ATP, getting the energy from the chemical bonds, and adenosine diphosphate, which has two phosphates. ATP is used to split glucose molecules into a pyruvate. This splitting produces a molecule called NADH. Glucolysis does not require oxygen. The next step, however, will be different depending on whether there is oxygen available, aerobic or not anaerobic. But glucolysis does require NAD+. If there is oxygen, the further process will be the so-called Krebs cycle or citrate cycle, followed by the electron transport phosphorylation. This process will change NADH into NAD+ with the aid of oxygen. Yeasts will be able to grow. This explains why some oxygen is needed at the beginning of a fermentation process. In anaerobisis, without oxygen, the process will be different. In the human body, the pyruvate molecules are transformed in lactate by the last enzyme of glycolysis, lactate dehydrogenase. That lactate is the cause of the pain I mentioned earlier and that you must already have experienced for sure. The fermentation will use pyruvates to help generate NAD+. Pyruvate plus NADH equal lactic acid plus NAD+. In yeast, however, there are two different enzymes at the end of the process. Those two enzymes, pyruvate decarboxylase and alcoholic dehydrogenase, convert pyruvate into NAD+, carbon dioxide and ethanol. Pyruvate plus NADH equals ethyl alcohol plus NAD+ plus CO2. Now don't say, let's go, I'm going to make some vodka with water, sugar and yeast. The fermentation process may start but won't last for a long time. Enzymes are proteins. Proteins imply amino acids. Amino refers to nitrogen. The glycolysis uses phosphorus. We can understand that all these elements must be available to enable the yeast metabolism. You won't find anything similar in water. If you want to ferment a mixture made of water, yeast and sugar, yeast metabolism requires some other components that we can call nutrients. Yeast cells require phosphorus, nitrogen and potassium, as well as amino acids and vitamins B1 for metabolic processes. Diammonium phosphate, magnesium sulfate, odorized yeast and B1 vitamin are sometimes necessary to support the fermentation process. Well, that's it. We have reached our destination. We discovered a small part of the amazing land of smiles, Thailand. Then we discussed about life and energy, considered the different types of beverages depending on the feedstock they are made from. Together with Louis Pasteur, we learned about yeast and finally observed the cellular respiration, both aerobic and anaerobic, to understand how the latter enables the production of alcohol. See you next week for another stage in this amazing journey in the world of wines and wines of the world. Grape varieties will be the next topic. Cheers!